but I also think there needs to be a bit of a different route in terms of streamlining just how everything works across the board in the youth national teams. And I think it would actually benefit Canada Soccer to a point like an overall sporting director type thing to oversee everything from, the work with the head coach of the women's national team, whoever that might be, with Jesse Marsh, and then also streamline everything below that. So, you're developing teams from those, U17 levels all the way up to the first team in a way that we've seen sort of Spain do it over the years, where, you're graduating coaches from those lower levels up into the higher levels. For the, women's national team potential coaching vacancy, we're talking about, a potential of a Cindy Tai, which I don't think anybody's necessarily talking about her moving up to that role. And so I think there just needs to be more of a streamlined pathway, both in terms of coaching, both in terms of playing, in terms of development across the board, that we haven't seen in this country. And if that gets put in place, it's a massive project to put in place, no doubt. But we see it with the likes of a Spain, with the likes of an England, with the countries that have, developed those coaches, developed those players throughout the levels. And I think that's something that could benefit Canada. And that's not a role that Canada's necessarily had filled, the sort of an oversight sporting director role. And I think it could be interesting organization.
I think that's a great shout. And a sporting director specifically, and the idea that you're going to have some pathway or some type of step program within the coaching system, as opposed to looking at it separately, which is how we've always looked at it. The U15s are U15s, U17s, U17. And there'd be personnel or some coaches that would try to implement some type of integration, but it was exclusively based off of personal relationships. It wasn't based off of any structure. Mm-hmm. It was almost like nepotism. If there was a senior coach that paid attention to this team because there was some personal connection there or some relationship, right? So yeah, I completely agree. You want to get away from that and have an actual function system. And when it comes to employing Canadians and having Canadians work in the game, people who know the program, know the system, have experiences elsewhere that can bring that. Like, that's what's so valuable about Kevin Blue and Jesse Marsh. They both have tremendous experiences elsewhere, in addition to whatever their relevant sporting experience is to be, qualified for the positions in which they have with Canada Soccer, right? I really like that shout for a sporting director. And, the tag that they put on this Mauro Estacchio position, this like coaching internship or whatever, I really think that the intention behind it is great, but I don't like that it seems like a revolving internship door. I think that there should be a way to make that feel more deserved and justified and part of the stepping stone program. And I think if you had a sporting director who I would really hope would exclusively be either an ex-pro or an ex-coach who has some experience within the national program, even if that's only as a player, in order to bridge those gaps and bring all those things together.
I mean, for me, in terms of what the ideal person for a sporting director would be, it would be someone from one of those countries that has had that pathway established, and you bring them over and they can kind of build that pathway in Canada. And I think that's something that could work. Of course, there's the financial side of it, which of course, might be a little bit more sorted out now that there's a tentative agreement based on whether CSB is able to rework that deal. But I think bringing someone over who has that experience of, bringing players and coaches up from the U15s all the way to the first team and creating that identity, like when you look at Spain, I think they're this kind of standard example, even though they've had a whole bunch of issues within their federation. But you look at Spain, like their U15s play the same way as their first team does on both the men's and women's sides, right? Like there's an identity to that federation. Yeah. And the way that Spain plays. And I think, Jesse Marsh has spoken about it already, that there's some people who say that you can't necessarily have an identity with the national team, but then, what the hell are you coaching for, right? You need to have an identity in the way that you're playing. And Marsh has been able to do that with the men's national team already. And it's about passing that down throughout the system. John Herdman, I think, was like the director of philosophy or something like that in terms of, also managing some of the youth teams and how they worked, but it was never quite the sort of synergy in the system or pathway that I'm kind of envisioning for the long term of Canada Soccer that a sporting director.
It's interesting, though. I'm going to pull on this point and I'll direct it to Alex, that you say you want to see someone come from another country that's established this, because I think the massive difference is in any of those countries you're talking about, and specifically Spain, is they have an entire infrastructure that starts from U4. Like that, we don't have that. Like the players haven't gone through a pathway system like that. The pay to play makes it so fucking complicated, and you lose so many people, and or you end up putting players in situations where their talent wouldn't naturally put them in, whether that's good or bad, right? So I don't think you can do that at all. I think what's good is if you have someone who has an experience that isn't exclusively to the domestic hell and chaos that I'm speaking about, but immediately actually someone who comes to mind for me, especially when you have people like Blue, who has a sporting experience and a success rate in both national sport and then private tier within the NCAA, which makes him such a unicorn, honestly. And then someone like Jesse Marsh, who is such a student of the game and a student of Red Bull football and thinks this way philosophy and bridges gaps, cultures, and really wants to be a part of it. You can take someone like a Paul Stalteri or someone of that type of experience who's like seen it abroad, played abroad, coached in this system, coached internationally, or a Mauro Biello, like someone like that. I think maybe Nick Dasovic, although that's someone personally I don't know as well, but like someone with that type of track record, especially because you have, Marsh, and let's be honest, I don't think we're expecting a Canadian to replace Bev Priestman if they change Bev Priestman. I want to see a Canadian in a power position. I think you have enough Canadians that have earned the right to do that, and you surround them with really good people like Blue and like Marsh specifically. I honestly think the sky is the limit for someone who hasn't been afforded that opportunity before.
And actually, one name that comes to mind, and then Alex, we'll let you jump in here, but he's not Canadian, but Axel Schuster has built something interesting with the Whitecaps with, a limited budget that can't necessarily compete with the big shots of MLS at this point. Could he potentially build something with Canada Soccer if he wanted a bit of a change of pace from the professional game in North America? Of course, he's not Canadian, but it does seem like that would almost fit the description that you're potentially thinking of, Brendan.
Say wrong Whitecaps now. I think you'd go Vanni Sartini.
Honestly, I'm 100% with Alex on that. 100%. I would go Vanni.
Because Vanni has that experience of coaching people, of
Coach Jesse Marsh.
Of methodology, of an identity, of passing it down. I think Vanni Sartini is exactly the name you're looking for in this regard. And I mean, yeah, I've just kind of been sitting back here and listening. It's bang on all parts. I mean, at this point, we know that with the youth national teams, there a shakeup is needed in the sense that, like, it's something that hinders Canada's ability to compete to their best. That they don't have, this full-fledged identity. That they don't even just have little things like experience together. But at the same time, I think there's reason for optimism, because I think Jesse Marsh is coming in on the men's side and kind of pushing that idea that, like, yeah, on the youth national team level, he wants that streamlining. He wants to be involved. The fact that this guy, his first few months on the job, he's gone to like provincial U15 championships. Like, I know there's a lot of national team coaches. Like, I'll just pull out an example. Why not? Former U.S. men's national team manager Jurgen Klinsmann. This guy, there was already beef there just because he wasn't going out to Korea to watch K-League games when he was manager of Korea, and then, that was a whole drama. Not only is Marsh going out to CPL games, MLS games, he was at the Whitecaps this past weekend. These guys out here at U15 PDP championships in Edmonton. He's on the right path, and I think that's going to obviously rub off on a lot of people around him, and they're going to want to implement similar methodology on both sides. And yeah, no, I think it's a must, because I think what's so fascinating though about this women's cycle, this U20 cycle, I still think there was a lot of reason for optimism for the players, for the group, despite it. Like, this team was quite competitive. And in 2022, they got they just weren't in any of the three games they were. It was such a, like, nondescript, 3 losses, go home. You barely got a sniff. You lost 3-1 to France, and the one goal you scored was in the 96th minute. They lost, like, 2-0 to South Korea. They went up first against Nigeria and lost 3-1. I will say, I mean, we can get into what I actually saw in terms of the youth tournaments, but then, yeah, you think of, man, imagine what this team could have done had they had that structure, had they had that support. And it does show how important it is to have that vision long term, because Canada at the youth level, it's fascinating. Having had the chance to kind of see some things, like, there's a lot of kids right now coming up who are learning some good football methodology, who are, you look at the way they play now, the things that are being prioritized, you're impressed. You're like, whoa, okay, these are things that I wish that when I was a kid growing up that I had, But then you look at some other places and you're like, oh yeah, those guys are stuck in the 80s. Those guys are kind of stuck in their old ways. And I think that's also the kind of weird part Canada soccer is that as a whole, is that there's a bit of a split of there's the modern thinking guys, the front facing guys. I think you've seen some of them in the League One, Ontario's, what they've done with some of their clubs and whatnot. And then there's still some old school thinking that it leads to guys falling through the cracks and important players falling through the cracks. And this happens on both the men's and women's sides.